Hello. Um, Trying to look a little different every day, so today I've got a hoodie on with the hood up. I feel like it might keep you entertained more. Today we're going to talk about John Cheever. And I've actually made this video a few times. Before I started this channel, what must have been about 7 or 8 months ago, I had made a bunch of videos using my phone, and I had made a John Cheever and Richard Yates video. And at the time, I was trying to bring in more theory into the way that I would talk about the books. And in the conversation of John Cheever and Richard Yates, I brought in the Russian formalist Mikhail Bakhtin. And the idea was that I wanted to talk about the uses of voice in the different writers. The big thing is that in American suburbia, the same way that the Russians have Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and things are either Tolstoyan or Dostoevskian after that epoch, I was trying to say that as far as American suburbia is concerned, our two voices are basically John Cheever and Richard Yates. I would be more inclined to say that John Cheever was like one of the classic Russians. John Cheever's style of narration, that he often begins his tales in the first person, I see X, Y, Z, and then before you know it, the first person narrator has vanished and everything is just third person. We're seeing that kind of same thing done with writers like Gogol and Dostoevsky. I think that Demons, the narrator, isn't really part of the book in Dostoevsky, but it's been a while since I've read Demons, so I could be wrong on that. I haven't made a John Cheever video yet for the channel, especially even after having made a video for Richard Yates, in large part because it's been so long since I've read John Cheever. So I read John Cheever for the first time in college. I believe it was about 2009. I can't remember ever having been assigned a John Cheever story in school, but my understanding is that a large number of people may have had a high school with a short story by John Cheever. The most popular, or we'll get into that. As far as right now goes, I just wanted to give you a heads up that I had tried to make a John Cheever video before, but also that it's been a long time since I've read John Cheever, and so the amount of time that I spend talking about each book is not going to be equal to one another, and in fact my overall review for Cheever's books might be a little shorter, not only because I've read all of his novels and he only has 5 and one's a novella, but because it has been so long. Now, if John Cheever is interesting to you, let me know, of course. I'd love to see more comments in my videos. Another part of why I'm making this video is because the Life Before Books channel, or not Life Before Books, Life on Books, the lead guy of that made a video recently on a book that wrote about fiction, and the writer of the book talked about John Cheever apparently a great deal, and the guy from Life on Books said that he hadn't read much John Cheever. And that made me think, maybe I should make a John Cheever video because there are likely people who haven't read him but will be willing to spend the time. So, that's where we are. I'm Mark, and if all this sounds interesting to you, this is Several Books. Okay, so I'm going to show a picture of John Cheever. This is on the back of the stories of John Cheever. This is how we like to remember John Cheever, but as has been revealed in, say, the last 20 years, this is not the John Cheever that many people would say is authentic. We need to put a preface on any discussion of John Cheever, which is that he had abused somebody he was mentoring. And all of this came out after Cheever's death, but I believe it was in the early 2000s. And that is something that we have to cope with Cheever, because all of his writing tends to be very optimistic. He's not somebody who swears a great deal. There aren't extreme situations in his fiction. In a way, he kind of invented the New Yorker story with the stories in this book. There are about 60 stories in the stories of John Cheever. It really does cover most of his career. There are basically all of the big name stories of Cheever in this book. Now, he wrote several collections of short stories, and because I know how the publishing industry works as a consumer, not somebody who worked in publishing, but I'm familiar with buying somebody's entire works. Oftentimes, specific stories are left out of these career retrospectives to leave people with something else to buy. So a lot of those books I don't think are currently in print, but there are probably many more stories of Cheever's kind of out there floating around than just what's in this book. Now, as far as what's in this book goes, his most famous story is probably called The Enormous Radio. And if I'm remembering the story right, a husband buys his wife a large radio. They live in an apartment building. The radio begins to play the arguments of the other denizens in the apartment building. Not all of his stories have that kind of magical element to them. That's really the only one I can think of that's outright magical. But we do see some absurdity in other stories. If I'm right, there's a story in here, for instance, that a guy, the first, like, say, quarter or third of the story is a guy flying on an airplane. And then the airplane crashes, and the guy just goes home like nothing ever happened. And I don't believe that the air crash is ever mentioned again for the rest of the story. Another story that's really fun for Cheever is called The Swimmer. And is it The Swimmer? I believe it's The Swimmer. Yes, it is. And that story is basically a guy decides to swim across a gated community or a neighborhood or something. Upper middle class, everybody's got a swimming pool, and what he does is he goes over that weekend day or whatever it is, like I think it's a Sunday, he dives in the water, swims across the one pool, hops out, goes to the next neighbor, swims across their pool, and he's doing this for every house that has a pool in the area. In general, his stories tend to be about brothers. There are a lot of brothers in this collection. I think his most famous story that I'm not mentioning is called something like Goodbye, My Brother, or So Long, My Brother. But yeah, that's about all I can say. Goodbye, My Brother is what it's called. Yeah, this is an S tier book. Regardless of things that happened with Cheever in his lifetime, this book is good as a contribution to literature. So that's not to excuse Cheever's behavior, and it's not to discredit any accounts of it. It's only to say that sometimes good things come from people who have done bad things. So I would say that this is a good thing that came from what it sounds like was a bad person. So Stories of John Cheever is an S. In general, these stories are going to be, they're not crass. He rarely swears. He did get in trouble once for printing the word "God damn it." But that's really the more extreme that we're seeing here. There are more realistic stories where somebody just has like a Chekhovian story. They meet somebody, there's a conversation, that's pretty much the whole story. But Cheever really knew what he was doing, so he had some pretty narratively complex stuff going on. What I just want to say is that before I put this book down, there are more realistic stories in here than the Enormous Radio, but there is a part of Cheever that likes that kind of magical element of things, this sort of disbelief around a fictional story. And there are a few stories in here that may not directly contain magic, but that will probably seem like that type of writing to you. So that's the Stories of John Cheever, and that's an S. Now, we're going to start with the novels, and I'm going to go through these in the order in which they were printed. As I've already made you aware, it's been since probably 2009 since I've read some of these novels. So the first one is the Wapshot Chronicle. I believe this might have been the first book by John Cheever that I read. It was either this or the Stories of John Cheever. Oh, by the way, the Stories of John Cheever won both a National Book Award and a Pulitzer. So it's a very, decorated book. The Wapshot Chronicle, or Wapshot Chronicle, is a story, as I said, he often wrote about brothers. This is a family. I think they're in Massachusetts. Yes. So on the back of the book, it's described as a Massachusetts fishing village. What I would say about John Cheever here is that the writing is sort of like if J.D. Salinger was writing for an older audience. I like J.D. Salinger okay. He's not my favorite writer, but I don't hate him. I really like John Cheever, but why I'm bringing up J.D. Salinger is that J.D. Salinger at one point said that he wanted to be like John Cheever, and Cheever was his favorite writer. And I really think there is something, despite that I like Cheever more than J.D. Salinger, to a comparison between the two. Basically, Cheever is like Salinger for people older than, say, Salinger typically gets picked up when you're a teenager, maybe nearing 20 or something, but he's not typically read by people who have been past 18 for very long. Cheever is good for that. This is a family novel. The thing that I remember most from reading the novel is one of the brothers at one point is like enamored with this woman who's, I think, rich, and they've got a big house and they're doing work on it, and the brother is like running across the roof of the house to hide that he's talking to the girl. The biggest thing that I remember about this book is that toward the end of the book, it becomes a first-person narrative. And I believe it's the father of the two boys who is basically writing the book. And that's the implication, at least. I don't know if he comes out and says, like, I've been writing until this point, but you get the idea that the father has written the book. For that sense, it's experimental. It asks questions about how we make fiction. Stylistically, Cheever very rarely says a negative thing about something, and he very rarely writes negations. So you don't see that he did not do X, Y, Z in Cheever like you see with the earlier modernists or maybe in Samuel Beckett. Typically his writing is very positive, and this sense of always affirming things comes through in a type of optimism in his writing. So I would say that the Wapshot Chronicle is an S tier book. I wish I could delve more into plot points of this for you, but I'm having trouble. Just keep in mind that this is sort of like the beginning of the postmodern movement in a sense. His sense of humor and his exploration with narrative, in my opinion, seems to show up in writers like Thomas Pynchon, for example. And we'll find out about that in the next book when those things become more salient. So that's the Wapshot Chronicle and then S. So what we've got next is the Wapshot Scandal. I believe this was his second novel. It might have been either Bullet Park or Falconer, but it makes sense to review this as it is the sequel to Wapshot Chronicle. This carries on the story of the two brothers. The father is no longer present really in the book. There's no implication that he's writing the story down either. I don't remember this book super well. I remember a few conversations in an apartment. I remember the one brother gets a job working for the government and like in defense or in espionage or something. Other than that, the thing that I want to talk about with this is that like it's mentioned in the introduction and it's not a huge part of the story, but it's in this book. In this book, the Vatican gets a nuclear weapon. So I've mentioned that books that Cheever wrote have some kind of humoristic element that seems to be the beginning of postmodern. The ideas behind a writer like Pynchon or William Gaddis, some of that humor. And the Vatican getting a nuclear weapon is definitely kind of in that realm. We would only think of that as with a country with a military and so on and so forth, and the Vatican is not armed to the teeth to my knowledge. So that is in here. The book didn't stick with me. That's a problem with Cheever that I have, is that his books didn't uniformly stick with me as well as others. I would say that this is like an A minus. So let's say this is a B plus or an A minus. If you're reading Wapshot Chronicle, there's no reason not to also read Wapshot Scandal unless you really hate the book. They all throughout all of Cheever, you're not gonna be totally shocked by any of his other books by what's in one book. He's an interesting guy. I mean, his fiction is interesting. It might not be the most revolutionary or exciting stuff you've ever seen, but if you liked the Wapshot Chronicle, you will like Wapshot Scandal. If you didn't like Wapshot Chronicle, try some of his short stories because it's likely his novels are not going to be for you. So this is like a B plus or an A minus. The next book we're going to talk about is called Bullet Park. I have a nice old hardcover. It's got a good sized picture of Cheever when he's a little older on it. Bullet Park is I believe it's named after the community where the characters live. Cheever, except in one book, Falconer, typically wrote about kind of middle-class people, and even Falconer has that to an extent, but we'll talk about that as next book. So you're getting a lot of middle or upper middle-class people. The thing that's strange about Bullet Park is that the main characters have the last name Nails. And there's this guy in prison who gets out of prison, and he basically decides to go after this family, and his last name is Hammer. So again, we've got some kind of postmodern playfulness in the book. The son of the Nails family falls into some sort of depression. And he becomes very interested in holy texts. So it might remind someone of Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger, for instance. This plays into the latter part of the novel. But most of what I remember is Nails living in an abandoned house briefly, or a house where the family had gone on vacation or something. From what it sounds like, Hammer and Nails, young guy who's becoming very interested in religion. Think of like Franny and Zoe, or even a book like The Names by Don DeLillo. It's that kind of book. The style, in my opinion, is very good from what I remember. It's crystal clear, and it's clear that J.D. Salinger was very interested in Henry James. Now, all that said, apparently a lot of people thought this was not as good as Cheever's other books. I actually really like this. I think I liked it more than Falconer. This might be my second favorite Cheever novel, but it's up for who's gonna make that declaration. I'm certainly not a very skilled writer or critic of literature, so I'm just gonna say that for me, this book is basically on a level with Wapshot's Scandal. Let's give this a B plus, and encourage whoever is interested in Cheever to give it a look. Now, I just realized we're not reading the books in order. I'm not going through the books in order because I think this might actually be an older book than Falconer. 1969, and what was this? 1975. No, this appears to be correct. So, Falconer. Here's a good picture of Cheever also. He's a very photogenic guy, and he basically invented the New Yorker story as it existed after the 50s. If you're looking at fiction from Harper's or the New Yorker or Paris Review or any of those kinds of lit journals, there's a very good chance that the writers you're reading in it at some point have read Cheever. Falconer is a book about some prisoners. John Cheever did work as a teacher in a prison for a period of time. I believe he was writing Falconer when he was doing that. This book has a moment of infestation with rats. The prison at one point gets overwhelmed by rats. And I mention it like that because it's not like your normal infestation where there might be a rat on the floor and there's a trap and it's a prison, so they're handling it. It's comically overstated. It's exaggerated to the nth degree. The book really does, because of the way that the prison carnival is happening, remind one of certain elements from a book like Gravity's Rainbow, or Great Jones Street by DeLillo, or something by Gaddis. Again, that's not totally his mode of writing, but Cheever was writing kind of before a lot of these guys. He was like, 10 years before they really took off. So it would make sense. Now, this book isn't, we're talking more about his short stories and the Wapshot Chronicle. But that sensibility goes throughout his writing, and he was writing before those guys, so this kind of gives you something else interesting. I do remember about this book that there are a lot of monologues. In that sense, it reminded me sort of Brideshead Revisited. There is a problem with the book. In my opinion, Falconer is not really the best novel ever. Now, another thing I need to state is that this is a work of early gay fiction. Before gay fiction was really a thing in the U.S., Falconer did come out. There were writers who were writing, of course, but it wasn't quite as on the main stage as that. And there is a gay relationship in this book, if I remember right, or something like that. There's not really any sex, I don't think. Falconer was also won a place on the Time Top 100 Novels since 1923. So Time Magazine wanted to avoid talking about Ulysses. They made their top 100 of the 20th century start after 1923 for that reason. So this is on their top 100. Wapshot Chronicle is on the Modern Library top 100 from the 20th century. So there is that. The last thing I want to say about Falconer is that John Cheever mostly writes kind of middle class, upper middle class into wealthy characters. We don't really have poverty in any of his books. We don't have the complicated environments that breed people in the justice system. So what's going on with Falconer is that his main characters, or his main character, I think, is like a upper middle class guy, and he's in a prison, and I believe there are some violent offenders in the prison. I don't remember exactly the makeup of the prison population, but the issue is that it's not totally convincing that this guy is potentially violent and in prison, and everything is coded for that upper middle class, income level. So it's similar to how with Hubert Selby Jr.'s book, The Demon, we're never really totally sold that guy really is a business person, and it's just never really totally mentioned what exactly his role is in his company. It's something up there, and he's been successful, but you're getting this written by Hubert Selby Jr., who did not come from that environment, and so it's never totally convincing. Cheever is not the world's most convincing writer of criminals. Certainly, this book bears nothing in resemblance to a book like The Room by Hubert Selby Jr. And the violence in Selby's The Room. That said, the book is well written. Cheever really did have a very good handle on style. It's just that when you read this, if you read it, and I think you should, you're not going to be confronted with the darkest realities of prison in a way that might make sense to the contemporary reader. This is going to be a bit like watching Paul Newman's Cool Hand Luke. I mean, it's a great film, but by contemporary standards for prison films, it's not really connecting to our daily life today. Falconer is a great book. It's a prison novel. It's an LGBTQ book. It's just, in my opinion, it's not maybe top 100 books of the century. Let's give this a B plus as well. Let's say B plus is fair. Yep. Okay, the last John Cheever book I have is the one I read the most recently. That's called Oh, What a Paradise It Seems. It's a novella. I actually only read this one about a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago. I had read all of Cheever's other novels, and I had read that short story collection, and I realized this was a book by Cheever that I had never read, and I wanted to read Cheever, and I wanted to read Cheever that I hadn't read. So I got this, and I blew through it in an evening. How long is it? My copy is exactly 100 pages. Critics don't like this book. I actually don't particularly like this book either. There is the most graphic representations of sex that we see in Cheever in this book. He's definitely seeming to try to stay current with the times. The book is about an old man and a young woman lawyer or something, if I remember correctly. And the old man he manages to seduce the younger woman. their meeting happens around like a pond or a little wildlife area of this community, and they're trying to protect it. There's not much else to say about the book, really. The writing is clear, it's good, it's solid, it's got that Henry James crispness. But I can't really say a whole lot else beyond what I've said. I think it's likely that if you were watching this or you wanted an idea of something to write potentially like an eco-criticism like review about, or if you wanted to write about fiction that dealt with environmental stresses, this would be a potential book for you. But otherwise, this is not worth. It's not worth your time or your money unless you're reading Cheever. If you're reading all of Cheever, then yes, read this, of course. But otherwise, the only real time that I could see me recommending this to a person would be if I were talking to a college student who was writing some type of paper on fiction about the environment or eco-criticism or something like that. As it is, this is a let's say this is a C. It's his last book, and I don't have to worry about offending him, especially a man like Cheever, who probably deserved to be offended a bit more in his life. This is not really worth reading unless you're reading all of Cheever or you're writing about eco stuff. So again, overview of John Cheever. Basically, he's got a few books that secure him as a giant in the 20th century. He's not the greatest giant, but he is at least as a short fiction writer. The short story in the U.S. owes him so much debt. It's not even funny. He is so important to the history of publishing short stories. I think you should read Cheever. I think he might surprise you a little bit. He's not just about American suburbia. Pretty much all of his stories do involve American suburbia, but there are multitudes of different characters. His strongest characters are typically brothers. He really likes writing about that kind of upper crust New England background. He himself did not come from a great deal of wealth, I don't believe, and I believe he was basically living in an artist's poverty for some time. But yeah, that's John Cheever. He's interesting, and you guys should check him out. I hope that you look into some of the stuff that I've mentioned in this video, whether they be other YouTube channels or anything else like that. Certainly, although this is a very small channel, I'm a big fan of that Life on Books guy and the two guys on that, and I think they run a really good show. So you might want to check them out. That was the reason ultimately for me making the John Cheever video. So thanks, guys. I've been Mark, and several books out. Bye-bye.